Okay, good evening and welcome everybody to this inaugural lecture of the Learning and Teaching and the Inclusion series. Tonight we're going to be looking specifically at dyslexia and other learning difficulties experienced by our students. I'm Professor Amanda Blackmore and I am Deputy Vice-Chancellor. So first of all, welcome to BPP University as well as welcome to the series. And I just want to say thank you all so much for making an extra special effort to get here, particularly bearing in mind the travel difficulties that we have in London today. And I hope that you'll be able to make your way back relatively easily after the event. Tonight we've got not just one speaker, but we have two speakers tonight. The first speaker is Dr. Tim Francis, who's going to be speaking first. And just wanted to say a few words about Dr. Tim Francis' background. He is an educational psychologist. He's an Associate Fellow of the British Psychological Society, a member of the Division of Educational and Child Psychologists. He has 11 years teaching experience, perhaps not in a field that you would expect, and 18 years experience as an educational psychologist. And in that time, he's also assessed my husband, who's severely dyslexic. So thank you very much for your work with my husband. Completely coincidental. I didn't know that until I saw his name and realised he was speaking with us tonight. And he's also got more degrees than a thermometer, but again I can let him tell you about those as well. And then after that, we're really lucky to have a BPP University alumnus with us to speak. We have Daniel Malin, and he is here to tell us about his experiences and also the outreach work that he does with a number of schools and organisations. He studied the BPTC and is a qualified barrister, so again he'll tell you a little bit more about that. What I just wanted to say is that as educators, it's very, very important that we are aware of all of the different learning difficulties that our students may experience, so that we can either try to eliminate them or at least mitigate the impact of those learning difficulties in their learning experience and give them an equal opportunity as any other student to be successful. So I'm really delighted that we're able to run this series, and I'm going to hand over a few words now to our esteemed colleague. So Nick Glossop is going to say a few words about learning support and inclusion at BPP University.
Thank you. Hi everybody, thanks again for coming. I will keep this very brief so we can press on. Just a couple of things before we start. There is a fire escape just left out the door and left again. We're not expecting a fire drill. And also, could I kindly ask that people actually switch their mobile phones completely off unless you need them for some kind of emergency or something, just because we suspect they may interfere with the cameras in terms of the signal. We're not sure on that. Is that okay? Just briefly then, I'm lucky enough, and I mean that, it's a privilege to head up the Learning Support and Inclusion Service at BPP University. And some of my colleagues are here. I'll not waste time now, but we're happy to take questions and speak to anyone afterwards about what we do as a team. We look after the learning difficulties and disability at BPP, but also the student-facing equality and diversity as well. So we look after the whole thing really, and that's a great privilege and honour. So without further ado, Mr. Tim Francis, our colleague, thank you very much.
First thing I do is turn off Let's check this off as instructed. There we are. Right. Okay. If you would like a copy of this presentation, and there's various bits and pieces in it that I don't expect you to read tonight, such as definitions of dyslexia and that sort of thing. I've kept them on the presentation. You can email me there, or you can take a business card if you'd like. I'll leave them up the front here. And send me an email, and I will send you a copy. Okay. Many, many years ago, when I began my training as an educational psychologist, someone showed me this, well, I've cobbled this together, but it was sort of like that. And the idea was there's this sort of mountain, and on the top of this mountain is this wonderful academic high ground where the air is thin and the thinking is refined, and down the bottom is this swamp where it's all mucky and murky and things are not clear. And I was explained that that's where I'm going to work as an educational psychologist, right in the muck and the murk. And I'm not sure I buy it completely, but I think this serves a useful purpose for today, because this is what's happened. If you want, I've been dragged kicking and screaming out of the lovely warm swamp to come and talk to the august organisation here. So what I'm going to do is talk about what I see when I assess students, and what the students tell me, and what conclusions I come to down in the swamp. Hang on. There we go. Now, just to give you a sort of a taster of the way that the high ground and the swamp interact, there's just a sample of tests that I use on a daily basis, all of which have been constructed in the academic high ground and bought by swamp dwellers like me, and there's about £5,000 worth there. So there's some academics driving some nice cars. Equally, in the appendix of all my reports, I will cite references, and that's an average set of references. What I'm seeking to do is to link the test scores that I find with an analysis of those test scores linked to peer-reviewed thinking. So I'm not just coming out of my own thinking, I'm linking it, I hope, very much to peer-reviewed ideas. The assessment that I undertake for this university and many others is very highly regulated, and it's set really in a sort of great thick document that's issued by something called the Specific Learning Difficulties Working Group, and that was a group of people that were involved in specific learning difficulties. It includes the Department of Education, British Dyslexia Association, Dyslexia Action, schools, universities, the British Psychological Society, and there was a great big sort of group, and they said, look, let's identify what a really good assessment looks like. And they published it, and I assess according to their guidelines. In essence, what I'm required to do is, as you can see that list there, look at a history, so what's the student's background, what's going on today for them. I look at their reading, I've got to assess their reading, I've got to assess spelling and handwriting under a number of different conditions. I look at number, if the students report a need. I look at dyspraxia, which is a sort of motor coordination type difficulty. I look at their written work, and I also am required to do an IQ test, or a test of cognitive ability. Why? Because essentially you're comparing attainment, reading, against something. Now, it's not always possible to undertake an IQ test, in which case I would go with a clinical estimate of academic potential based on a lot of factors. For instance, the person's history. They may have come from another country, shall we say, and then scratched their way up and speak English and now working at professional level. I think that tells you a lot about that person. Okay, so when I sit down with a student, the first thing I do is we take a history. And what I often find is that students are telling me that they've experienced these difficulties from primary school onwards. Often they tell me that there has been a bit of support here, a bit of support there. Very often there's been no support. Very often they tell me that their parents were regularly knocking on the door of the school and saying, you know, my little boy, my little girl needs some help. What are you going to do about it? And they're fed baloney, like, you know, they'll grow out of it, that sort of thing. By the time a student reaches university level, they're the type of person that is coping probably by putting an enormous amount of hard work and time in. And I think what's very important to note is that very often the people that I see, the students I see, the first time they've ever been assessed, the first time anybody's ever taken them seriously in a sense, is through the referral from learning support to me. So you perform a very important role in picking up specific learning difficulties. When I assess reading, students tell me a mix of things. They tell me, they tell me that their reading is fine. They tell me that their reading is fine, and as I probe with a few questions, it turns out that their word reading is good, but they're finding they have to repeatedly read to understand. Their reading is probably influent, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Or they'll just straightforward, they'll say, my reading's not right. Whatever is going on with me, I don't know, but I can't read the words I need to read, and I have to look them up and that sort of thing. And you may get all of the above, any of the above, and the students raise a question about their ability to comprehend. So even though they're reading the text many, many times, they're finding that they still can't understand it. When I assess, I find averagely a range of things. I find that the reading is fine. It's beautiful and smooth and even and rapid. I might find that the students read accurately. The Paddington Bear went to the station. It's accurate, but it's influent. The trouble with influent reading is it's a little bit like you're reading something and your little brother keeps poking you. Because every time you sort of pause to work a word out, you get distracted and you lose your train of thought. So when you reflect that back to a student, say, look, this is what's happening for you, they nod and you say, trouble is that type of reading, it makes you tired because you're reading everything over and over and over, and then you fall asleep, and they say, how do you know this, you know? Often students' reading is inaccurate and influent, so they're misreading, they're miscuing words, and even the words that they can read are broken down, so it's a very disadvantaged way to read. Sometimes students, they either know the word or they don't, so their reading is simply inaccurate. They've not really got the skills to break words down. I'm also required to look at a student's ability to break words down, to decode, phonics if you want. And often you find that students find that very difficult. Very often you'll see a pattern where students can break words down. They can go k, at, for instance, but they can't do the cat bit, bringing the words together. Now why is that important? Well, I think, and I think there's research to back it up, that what happens is you sort of break words down, reassemble them, and then you sort of hold the picture of the word and the sound of the word in a little bit of volatile memory. Now, you can call that all sorts of names, but I think it's a little bit of volatile memory. And you hold that picture and sound, long term comes along, captures it, files it, and next time you see the word, you recognise it instantly. Cat, you don't have to keep breaking it down. So that's why it's important to look at phonics. Equally, as I look at reading, I find students whose reading comprehension skills is not right for them. It's inconsistent, it's wobbly. It may be appropriate for their academic potential. There may not be a statistical discrepancy between reading comprehension level and your IQ, if you want, but their comprehension isn't right, and you'll say to them, your comprehension seems a little bit inconsistent to me. Have you been told across your academic life that you've not answered the question, you've missed the point? Read the question with a puzzled voice and they say yes. Equally, you might find comprehension is just very low. That's an easy one, isn't it? Okay. As far as the implications for lecturers are concerned, I think if you want to start to detect these sorts of things in your students, it might be good to see students read aloud, look for miscuing, and look for slow decoding of words rather than instant reading. maybe it would be good to look at a student's comprehension. So maybe if you're in a tutorial and you see a student who's read a vignette but doesn't seem to get the gist of it, they've miscomprehended it. I think also a giveaway may be handing work in late because students are spending so long reading. Or does the student report spending a lot of time reading and doing their written work? So we move to spelling next. Students will tell me either their spelling is fine or they'll tell me their spelling is not. There's not much really you can... When I test, where are we? When I test it, I find that the spelling is appropriate, or I find that the spelling is not consistent with their potential and their exposure to education. For lecturers, I think the implication are that maybe it would be good to see a sample of handwritten free writing. Obviously anything that's gone through a computer, you've got the autocorrect nowadays. Looking for spelling errors, and also the excessive use of short words. This is a rule of thumb if you want. I look for words of 4 letters or less. When you look at a sample and there seems to be lots of very short words, it stands out. It looks like an immature script. I reckon about 65%. If 65% of the script is 4 letters or less, I think you've probably got a little bit of a problem. And also you can check for grammar and punctuation errors as well. Now, once you've tested reading and spelling, you need to consider whether you wish to diagnose dyslexia. In brutal terms, dyslexia is a discrepancy between reading, spelling and potential, however you do it. There is a little bit more sophistication. That's the British Psychological Society definition of dyslexia. And for those of you who've heard of the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic manual that came out last year, it's the American version. It's used across the world as if you want a baseline for diagnosing psychiatric and psychological conditions. And you can see it's much more comprehensive than the BPS definition. If you combine the BPS definition and the DSM-5, in a nutshell, what it's saying is that you can diagnose dyslexia, specific learning disorder, if the student's reading accuracy is not right for their potential, fluency, we've talked about, comprehension, decoding, all the things we've talked about so far, spelling accuracy, and also the DSM-5 is bringing in grammar and punctuation and basically the clarity of their written work. Now, I'm not sure I would feel totally comfortable with diagnosing dyslexia on clarity of written work, grammar and punctuation, but it may be an occasion where you need to switch into the American version, but I've never done it yet. If you look into dyslexia, you will inevitably come across references nowadays to working memory. Working memory is that little bit of volatile memory that I talked about earlier. There's a couple of references if you want to explore it. Okay. I think the process, I think what the academic papers are really describing, if you want to get it down to a nutshell, is this information flow in to the volatile memory, the little bit of short-term memory that's held for a fraction of time, and then long-term memory can grab it. Now there is a controller called executive functions, and the executive functions think of as the manager, and the manager has got all these little departments and she's controlling them all, and she's making sure that they all pay attention. See, she's got lots of different departments there. It's just, the thinking is that there's this overarching controlling mechanism, executive functions, and the core thing about executive functions are mature, well-developed executive functions, as you're always actively seeking to make forward progress and paying attention. So when executive functions are not well developed, not mature, you may find problems with attention, or you may find difficulties executing things, getting from one place to the beginning of an essay to the end. Handwriting. Students tell me that their handwriting is fine. It's all remarkably often they say that, and it isn't. They'll tell me handwriting is slow. They'll tell me that they write at good speed, but people can't read it, and I explore that a little bit further, and I say, people told you that? Have you been told you've lost marks in examinations? And they confirm that's the case. Okay. When I test it, I quite rarely find that there's no problem. I very often find that handwriting is slow but legible. Primary school teachers have done a very good job along the way. The trouble is, you hit university and you need to be writing to compete at 30 words a minute, realistically. One pattern that I do notice quite frequently is that students, when they copy, their writing is quite fast. Legible, it's fine. But when you ask them to free write, and the test I use only asks a student to write for 10 minutes about their life so far. So we're not talking about high cognitive demand. We're talking pretty simple stuff. But suddenly their writing speed slows down. Now, my take on that is, I suggest to students that, look, it seems to be that there's this pattern. Do you have problems thinking and moving the pen at the same time? And they say, yeah, you know, gosh, it's fantastic you spotted that. So there seems to be some sort of resource conflict going on. And the best way I know to sort that, to address it, is to give the student additional training in academic planning skills, and then to give them additional time in exams to use the skills. And what I say to students is, what you need to do is you need to do a nice big plan, and then you start your writing, so you've already done your thinking, and then you do your writing, and it will get round that particular problem. I also see handwriting that is pretty hard to read or illegible, and I may, and it's quite rare, maybe less than once a year, diagnose dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is handwriting that is so hard to read, it's just completely impossible. And I have got consent from 2 students to show you some examples of dysgraphia, and these students were sitting examinations, in handwriting examinations, and you guys were trying to mark it. There's another one. So anybody disagree with that diagnosis of dysgraphia? Okay. So for lecturers, I think it would be quite good if before students sit exams you had a little look at their handwriting, because those 2 students sat exams and then they got sent to me because no one could read their writing. So maybe it would be a good idea just to have a little look beforehand. Right. I also look into dyspraxia. Now, dyspraxia is a deep-rooted, fundamental motor coordination problem. You have to have motor coordination problems which have existed since childhood into adulthood to diagnose dyspraxia. In academic terms, what dyspraxia affects, it tends to affect organisation, planning. Go back to our executive functions. As I assess and talk to students, we'll find difficulties with written work, we'll find their handwriting is untidy, and they report poor organisational skills. They will have slow information processing, so when you test with psychometric instruments, you find the information processing is slow. you find the handwriting is slow, hard to read, illegible. There's something going on with handwriting for sure, and their reading speed is slow. Okay. Now dyspraxia, the thing to look out for, I think, would be students who appear clumsy. They're maybe handing work in late or maybe incomplete work. They appear to be disorganised. Maybe there's some handwriting problems. They maybe process information slowly, so maybe in tutorials you ask a question and they seem to be very slow to respond. It could be that they read slowly, so maybe if you pass a vignette round in tutorial and they're still reading it when everybody else is ready to go. Again, those difficulties with completing written work, maybe they're asking you for assistance more than other students. And also, dyspraxic students often seem to have poor reading comprehension. I think they're disorganised at constructing text, and I think they're equally disorganised at deconstructing someone else's text. So they may report having to read things over and over. Okay. Now, dyscalculia is, I think of it as maths dyslexia. It's real problems with basic number processing. Adding, taking, dividing. You can have A-level maths and be dyscalculic. When you talk to students, they tell you that they recognise that description of dyscalculia, and that we have a screener that they can use, and they take the screen and the screen says a risk. When I assess, students report a history of problems with basic number processing, so they sort of make mistakes on the real simple stuff, but they can do calculus. It's quite strange. When I use a standardised test of basic number processing, adding, taking, dividing, excuse me, and they score very low. And also, as you interview them, they'll describe difficulties across their life linked to number. So, for instance, public transport, they tend to avoid it. They can't read the timetables, they can't plan the journey. They'll talk about difficulties with time management. They're either late for appointments, early for appointments, often overcompensating and becoming excessively early. And they often, remarkable, it tell you that they have got into financial difficulty. And they're managing their finances by being very, very austere. They're avoiding credit cards and loans. Okay, for dyscalculia, because of the time management implications, you may find students handing work in late. You may notice that a student has got financial difficulties. That's a bit of a giveaway. Again, the timekeeping, they may be late for lectures, for appointments. Or you may notice that the students doing very well with all aspects of the curriculum, and then you say do an accounting module or something, and they're all over the place. They don't seem to know what's going on. Okay. Now, I was asked to make this interactive, so I've got a little bit for you. It's only going to take a minute of your time. Some of you may have seen this next passage. It's not mine, it's from a chap called Ising. But I put it in because we've talked about students being a little bit disorganised, so they might come a little bit late for lectures, and also attention, they may lose attention. So this is just to give you a feeling of what it's like to be the student that came in a little bit late, or the students that's in your lecture and they've lost concentration. I'll read it with you, and when I finish reading it I'll say, does anybody know what it's about? Okay? Anybody any ideas?
Washing dishes.
Washing dishes? It's clothes. Good guess. You read it again, you can see. Yeah? Okay. Right, so in summary, if you wish to... Have I made a mistake there? No.
What was it, sorry?
They didn't hear the clothes bit.
Sorry? Oh, clothes. It was washing clothes. Where is it? How do you get it? There it is. It's washing clothes. Okay. Got it? Okay. So, in summary, if you wish to spot students who may have specific learning difficulties, it might be useful to see them reading aloud at the beginning of the course, maybe in tutorial, maybe in one-to-one session. Watching out for students who appear to miscomprehend. It might be useful to take a little sample of handwriting, maybe at the onset of the course. You can pick up spelling errors, use of the short words, poor grammar and punctuation. I think handing work in late is an absolute giveaway, especially at this level. Students are highly motivated. They've often, given up. Well, I think they're highly motivated. The ones that see me are highly motivated. And there's a couple of those screening tests. We put a little bit of our profit every year into pro bono, and this was two of the things we did. We're also producing a spelling one now. It's all free online, so you could use those with your students if you wished. Again, looking at the students who are a little bit clumsy and disorganised, maybe there's another little box you tick. One giveaway is, say you put a quote up and just watch the students. I mean, let's say you thought this is a good quote, I'll copy that. Just watch for the ones that are doing that. The working memory is weak, so they can't hold more than 2 or 3 words at a time, so they appear to be nodding up and down. There's a giveaway for you. And also the students who lose concentration. Okay. So, thank you so much for listening, and thank you for inviting me.
Good evening everyone, my name's Juliet Wagner, I'm the Deputy Dean of Learning and Teaching here at BPP. Thank you very much to Tim Francis for coming here and talking to us and hopefully educating us and making us much more aware so we can help our students to have every opportunity, the very best opportunities with us once they arrive. So thank you very much. Now we've got a very special guest this evening. I'd like to extend a hearty welcome to Daniel Mallin. And Daniel Mallin was one of my students when I was teaching the Bar Professional Training course, which is the course that we provide for want-to-be barristers, potential barristers, and Daniel was a star student despite having dyslexia himself. He's now a fully fledged practitioner in a law firm himself, and I thought that it would be really neat to invite him along today as a success story for BPP and for him to actually tell us about any struggles that he had along the way, anything in particular that helped him out, or anyone that might have helped him out. And I just think that really the best measure of success of anything we do has to be with our students, all in line with our big push and theme of working with students as partners. And so if Daniel can come and give us an insight into his experience, I think that has to be the very best measure of success. So over to Daniel. Thank you.
I do not have PowerPoint, so you'll just have to listen to me and not be distracted. Part of my introduction is now done. I am Daniel and I did the BPTC with Juliet in 2010 and 2011. I kind of differently from what Tim was saying, where he says he meets people that was diagnosed for their first time when they're at university. I was diagnosed very early, mainly because I had a very pushy mother who, my older sister is 8 years older than me. She's also dyslexic and she went through school without any support until university. So 8 years later on, she kind of learnt the mistake, so I got the benefit of her kind of not. So I was diagnosed when I was around 9 and 10, but wasn't statemented till I was 11 when I went to secondary school. And I think that's important because when you're statemented, the local authority have to give you support and help you with dyslexia. And I was incredibly lucky that my mother never let them take my statement away from me. There was 3 almost appeals on the issue, but they backed down after a while. So I was very lucky. So I came to higher education kind of fully aware that I was dyslexic and fully aware that I learnt in a very different way to other students. And I say this because, as Juliet kind of mentioned, people mentioned before, some of the work I do now is I go back to my old school and other old schools that some of my old dyslexia teachers now work at and talk to their dyslexic students. But the difference in about half a decade to a decade from when I started is that none of them are statemented. They have notes of special attention, and if they have a reading age of under 8 when they start, they get 6 weeks of intense, and I say intense, it's 1 hour a week, it's not intense, to try and bring them up to speed, and then they get me for a couple of hours whenever I'm free from work to talk to them about how I learn. So it's not great, and I think that's going to be a challenge that higher education is going to have to kind of meet up when they get there. So that being said, my experience with dyslexia. So I've moved on to the next page. My thoughts are very unorganised. I did it on the train to court this morning. So problems students will face once they know they have dyslexia and they're coming into higher education. If you're like me, you're quite bolshy and you're happy to say, I'm a dyslexic, give me that free computer university because I know I can get it. If you're not and you're a bit apprehensive, particularly in markets and institutions where you're competing and you feel like you are competing against each other, you will be slightly more apprehensive to kind of reveal, I'm dyslexic, can I get support and help? Particularly because, especially on the BPTC, we got computers to do our drafting and opinion writing because of our learning support contracts. Other students had to handwrite their drafting and opinion writing. Not a fun exam to do for 4 hours when you're being marked on the quality of your work. And so there can be tensions if you feel that as a dyslexic you're now being somehow advantaged because of your dyslexia. And what Tim said is that somehow handwriting 30 words a minute, I don't think I could ever do that in my life, let alone with handwriting. So I think that's the kind of point, is it's if you are a teacher and you are being shown with dyslexic students and their additional support is coming up and other students are questioning it, to be quite proactive in saying actually it's to create a level playing field, they're not advantaged. And I think the key word from Tim's talk that I always take away when I talk about dyslexia, it's not about anything else but potentiality. Your dyslexia is just hampering the potential you can raise to, and it's trying to equal foot us all. Moving on, so support I got when I was here, and I'll talk about support I got in other places, and because possibly when I got here at 21 and had quite a lot beforehand, I needed less, but we'll talk about what other students might want. I got a learning support contract, I'm trying to remember what they were called, and I kind of went knowing what I needed from BPP, and which I suppose won't be different to a lot of other people. I went knowing I wanted extra time in the exams because I know I needed it to read the questions properly. We'll come on to that later, and to have a computer. I didn't need what other students may need and what I've had previously, which was personal tutors that helped me with revision techniques and organising my diary and my time and working out independent learning programmes, which is what I had at university. So moving on to university, I went to University of Kent, sorry BPP, loved it though, sorry. And there, in my first year, I had a one-on-one personal tutor. She wasn't a lawyer, which was a bit of a problem when we had to kind of revise contract law. But moving on from that, what she did was once a week I had to meet with her, and I could say, well, I have 4 essays coming up, and I would plan when in my diary I was going to sit down and write that essay. And it sounds really, really obvious that as an 18-year-old I couldn't organise myself that well, but it was helpful to know that 1 hour a week I had to go with a plan of how I was going to spend the next week educationally. And it's something I always tell my people that I talk to with dyslexia is, it sounds like you're wasting time, but if I'm ever thinking, what do I need to do, and I do it most Sunday mornings actually for the next week, I will write a list of everything I need to get done by the next Sunday morning and roughly when I'm going to do it. And by that way I know I'm fine, that everything is going to be covered on one day. So that's one tip I would always say if you meet a dyslexic student, planning is key. I am terrible at planning naturally, and I force myself now to I now overplan everything. It's a bit of a problem. We're fine. So that's good. On something that Tim said, it's not in my talk, which is why I don't want to forget it, on how to diagnose dyslexia from university students. I obviously knew I was dyslexic. For one thing, my undergraduate degree did, which maybe BPP could take, I don't know if I didn't do your undergraduate here, is that they forced us all to write a 3-page essay, not on anything that difficult. It was called What is Law? And it wasn't tough. You were limited to 3 sides of A4 and 1 hour in a room, but it was handwritten and you had to hand it in, and you either got a mark of 30, 50 or 80, and that was it. And basically it was so that after the first week they knew if your English was up to scratch, or whether they should send you to go get testing for dyslexia, or whether you could structure an essay. And if you hit in the 30 category, you had to go and see Learning Support Department. It's a way of knowing from the very beginning. It's not knowledge based. There's no right answer to what is law. I think one of my friends wrote about parking tickets for a long period, if I remember correctly. And I just changed the question because I didn't like it and said, what is law to me? And wrote a personal account of what I wanted to do in my legal career. But it would find all your spelling, grammar mistakes, how they handwrite. So it's an idea to take forward, because it came up and I didn't want to forget it because it wasn't planned. Heaven forbid I forget something that's not planned. Okay, so and I've done that, so we're moving on to tips for revision, because it's a very mixed audience. Things I found that have helped me is that Tim is right, my short-term memory is terrible. I can keep it in there for a bit, and I'm that person that if there's a quote, I will be looking at it 10 times. And that is, I think, something important for if you have a dyslexic student to know that they will be struggling to note down everything you do in the slides and on the whiteboard. And if you wipe it clean, I won't write it. It was not written down. I won't have got it down in the same time. I was very lucky throughout my schooling that a lot of my teachers would prepare I don't want to call it a cheat sheet, but basically the key things that I had to have written down for each lesson, and I'll get those, and then my notes were then solid by the end of the week. So I think it's something to be watchful for if the students are struggling, because it is harder to get everything down and think about what you're writing. The next thing, I have got a spider diagram, it's terrible, I should stop doing these. The next thing I was going to talk about was my short term being terrible, but also that means that I remember to this day that I started revising for civil litigation and criminal litigation from the start. So at the end of at the end of each week, I would sadly write 5 cue cards for all my knowledge subjects on the BPTC. So that the first week we did the overriding objectives in civil procedurals, exciting stuff. I would write a couple of cue cards with all the key things I learnt in that, and I built a box. They all had their own box. I think I still got them. I should have bought them. And literally, I would write 5, and at the end, after I wrote them, I read last week's and I read this week's, and so by the time you get to the end of the course, you've already revised your syllabus about 100 times because you've read them each week, to the point where I was driving myself insane about syllabus. But that is how it works. That's how you put it in your long-time memory, and you come up with ways to keep it in there, and it's stuck. I still remember parts of my GCSE history syllabus from 8 years ago. And that was because that's how I did it. And that is, I think, kind of the commitment you have to have more so over non-dyslexic students, because you can't rely on cramming it in at the last moment. It just won't stay there, in my mind. I'm very aware that I could probably jabber on about dyslexia for a while, because I do. But I won't. I will open up to questions.